book which we recommend to everybody. It's sort of backwards in my camera here, but the Squiggly Career, which we use on the Management MSc program with our students when we do our Global Career Management module. But Sarah's got a very successful company that's about coaching, and she does a lot of different offers around that, which I will let Sarah talk to you about so she can explain to you in more detail. So Sarah, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Claire, and hello everybody. Thank you for choosing to spend the next 90 minutes or so in our company. I really appreciate it, and I know how busy you will all be. So my name is Sarah. I'm the co-founder of a company called Amazing If, and everything we do at Amazing If is about making careers better for everyone. We really want to provide useful, practical and relevant career development that you can use in your jobs, regardless of industry, experience or expertise. And we also want to make sure that we provide you with ideas for action, tools to try out that you can use for yourself, but that also you can share with other people. So we have a very open source, open innovation approach to the business that we run and the tools that we develop. And so the way that we're going to run today's workshop is we are going to very much do a workshop in a second. So I'll share my screen. There are no slides. We draw all of our different ideas and our tools because we know visuals are much stickier in terms of the way that our brains work than you looking at even more PowerPoint slides. If you're anything like me, in my corporate career, I spent a lot of time creating, reading, watching PowerPoint slides, and we probably don't need more PowerPoint slides in our lives in the main. So we'll do that in a second. Just so that you know, as we go through, if you've got any immediate questions, please do put them in chat, but we will have time for questions after the workshop. And we will be using the chat functionality a lot during the workshop as well. So as much as possible, I would love this to feel like a conversation. I'd love you to all get involved. But for any of you introverts out there like me watching this, please feel reassured that at no point am I going to put you on the spot or ask you to do anything you don't want to do. You can put your cameras on, you can turn them off. I really don't mind. What I want you to do is enjoy the learning experience. Final thing from me before I get started. After the session, we will share with you a playlist of things to read, watch and listen to learn more. So if you do hear me mention a Harvard Business Review article or an interesting podcast or a book, please don't worry about scribbling those down. We will bring all those together for you into something that's handily hyperlinked. But if you do have a pen and paper handy, it will be helpful for some of the exercises that we're going to run through together. So I hope that's all clear. I won't talk loads about my background in terms of my career because there's one of the exercises that we do together where you'll get a bit of insight into that anyway. And I'm much more worried about you getting lots of value than you learning lots about me, because you know you can always go on LinkedIn afterwards and do a bit of LinkedIn stalking if you'd like to. So let me just share my screen and we'll get started. Hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so let's just set careers in a bit of context and where this idea of squiggly careers came from. So often we do still see today careers characterized using a frame of reference that looks something like this. People talk about career ladders, we talk about steps, we think of progression as only meaning promotion. It's about having a very similar view of success, fixed plans, following in other people's footsteps. And I'm sure most of your experience of work so far hasn't felt linear, predictable, simple or straightforward. That doesn't really reflect anyone's experiences or aspirations anymore. But letting go of the ladder isn't easy. It's been around for a long time and it still does frame sometimes our own thinking and sometimes the thinking and some of the structures and the legacy systems that exist in our organisations. If you listen to people talking about careers, it's quite hard to let go of some of the words and the language that exists around ladders. I was even doing a session this morning with a global team all across the world who were all very, they're dynamic, they're quite young and quite early in their careers. And they were saying they still can't help but think about, well, what's the next step? And struggle to think about developing in different directions. So ladders are limiting, but they're not easy to let go of. And when we came up with this idea of a squiggly career, what we were really trying to do was to have a starting point where we are characterising our careers in a way that is much more reflective of the change and uncertainty that we all experience as part of our careers. No one has a straight line to success. I have interviewed incredibly successful, in kind of inverted commas, people, and nobody says, oh yeah, it all just looked very simple and straightforward. I did this and then I did that. Everybody has had what we call knotty moments or obstacles to overcome, choices to make. And we know that we're going to have 4 or 5 different types of career during our working life. That will be most of our realities, if not more. We're all going to be working for longer, unless you've got a lot of money, probably. And certainly the skills that we've got, we are going to be continually learning, unlearning and relearning. The World Economic Forum said recently that we used to go to work to learn to do a job, and now learning is the job. And I think that's quite a big mindset shift. Certainly from when I started my career, I felt like I was going to work to learn to be good at marketing. And that was my job to be done. And it took quite a lot of reframing in my mind to figure out, oh, actually, learning is not a transactional tick box exercise. It's not just about the bullet point that I can write on my CV. Moving away from being very fixed about my learning to actually being much more work in progress. If you listen to somebody like Reid Hoffman's one of the co-founders of LinkedIn, a great podcast called Masters of Scale. He talks about when he chooses to invest in an organization and in an individual, the most important thing that he looks for is, do they have what he describes as an infinite learning curve? Can he see a track record of somebody who is really good at continually adapting and continually learning and curious and kind of hungry to keep learning? So I think this kind of squiggly career probably reflects how we all feel, and certainly how we've all felt over the last year. And the bit that we're really interested in is how can we help people navigate these squiggly careers with confidence and control, because they often feel quite out of our control, and perhaps there feels like there are constraints that get in our way. So if we sort of accept, whether you want to use the word squiggly or something else, if we accept that our reality feels more like this, what is useful? What are the skills that we can learn for ourselves that are going to help us to have careers as brilliantly individual and amazing and full of potential and possibility as you will all have? How do we make the most of these squiggly careers? So there are 5 different self-awareness skills, is a good way of thinking about them, that I'm going to talk to you about today. And I'll ask you in a second which one of these feels most relevant for you right now. So perhaps have that question in mind as I talk through these different areas. The first one is really thinking about your strengths. Do you know what you want to be known for? Are you making sure that you are stretching your strengths? You're not letting them stand still. Do your strengths stand out and show up everywhere you do? What do people say about you when you're not in the room? Do you know? And have you thought really consciously about really investing in those strengths? And what are those 2 or 3 things that you really want to go from good or very good to great? And how do you make that transition? Usually we've given a bit of thought to our strengths, but something that perhaps we want to do a bit more thinking about. We're then going to talk a bit about values. Values are the things that motivate and drive you. They're the things that are most important to you. If your strengths are about what you do, your values are more about who you are. I think of values as a bit like a career compass. Once you know your values, it helps you to make much better decisions about what you want to do versus what you think you should do or what you could do. I think that point about control is really important. When you know your values, I think you can make seemingly braver choices, or it does mean that perhaps you can develop in different directions with the confidence that you know why you're doing something and how it's going to help you in terms of living your values and just doing more meaningful work that you find fulfilling. Really transformational, I think, values are, once you sort of spend some time thinking about them in a really practical way. Then we're going to talk a bit about confidence, building your self-belief. Less about the shiny stuff above the surface, presentation skills, body language, that sort of stuff. Helpful, but probably helpful in specific moments in time. We're really interested in the stuff below the surface. What can you do to build your resilience reserves so they're there when you need them? We all need to be resilient in squiggly careers because of the amount of change that we're all coping with. And sometimes we don't know when that's going to come our way. So we don't want to wait for that to happen to us. We want to continually create and invest in our own confidence. And so we'll talk a bit about what that looks like. Then a bit of a love-hate word. Certainly if you are like me and you are more introverted, we'll talk a little bit about networking. Now, if networking doesn't work for you as a word, I would suggest don't use it. If as a word, it frames your thinking in a way that's unhelpful, think of it as building brilliant relationships. Think of it as creating a career community that's going to support you and challenge you. When we think of networking, we define it as people helping people. And it's the one of all of the 5 areas we're going to talk about, I think, where the definition really matters. People helping people. So how can we start and approach our networks by thinking about what have we got to give rather than what do we need to gain? And I think once you start with that giving mindset, based on the work of a brilliant professor over in the US called Adam Grant, who works over at Wharton, he talks a lot about this idea of give and take, great TED talk. If we have this giving mindset, we know from his research that the givers are the most successful in organizations. And we'll talk a bit more about some of the nuances around that as well. And then the last area is about how do you think about possibilities, where your career could take you, moving away from this idea of a 5-year plan. And certainly I am someone who loves to plan. So the idea of a plan really appeals to me. But if we try to be too definitive and definite in plans, they're not that useful. They don't really help to guide us in the skills that we should learn or the curious career conversations we could be having. So we really want to move a mindset from fixed plans and fixed futures to exploring and being really curious about where our career could take us. And again, seeing that as something that we continually invest in rather than waiting until we are ready to make a change or that we want to do something different and then think, oh, I now need to start thinking about my career and what move I could make. And you'll notice I use the word move rather than steps, to just try and think more broadly about this squiggly career that we've all got. So I'm really interested to know from all of you, which one of those areas, let me write strengths just as a reminder under this first one, which one of those 5 areas feels most relevant for you in your role right now? And hopefully you should be able to put a star on my screen if the tech is all working okay. So have a look on your screen and see if you can see something that says view options, annotate, stamp, and then star. I might be telling you something that you're very used to using. It's actually not my Zoom account, so I can't always see all the ins and outs of exactly how what you'll be seeing on your screen. But let's have a go. If it doesn't work, we will come up with a plan B. But let me know if you can see a view options, annotate, stamp, and then star on the screen. Let's see if that does work. If not, we can just going to wait and see. We can do something in chat instead. Let me know. I can't see any stars appearing, so it might be that perhaps the Zoom functionality here doesn't have it. Tell you what we'll do. Why don't we put it in chat, because I can't see many stars appearing. So in chat, let me know which of those 5 areas. You can either let me know privately, or you can just, if you don't mind people seeing it, you can just put which of those 5 areas feels most relevant for you right now. Interesting to see if we've got a trend across the group or whether we're all sort of in slightly different places. Values coming up a fair bit. Interesting. Values, yeah, lots of people saying values. A few people on possibilities. We all talk about each of them, but it's always helpful for me to have that context and helpful for you to have that context, because what we're not suggesting is that you try and do all of these things at the same time. It would essentially end up being a full-time job, but it's useful to be thinking for yourself, where feels like the most helpful place to start when we're going through lots of ideas for action and tools to try out. Okay, great. We'll keep using chat because that is working well. Perfect. So let's start off with strengths. Let me know, again, staying in chat, which of these 3 things you think you do. Do you think you spend more time making your strengths stronger? Do you think you spend more time worrying about your weaknesses? Or do you think you do both equally? So just let me know in chat. SS, making your strengths stronger. WW, worrying about your weaknesses. Or do you think you do both pretty equally? There's no right or wrong with any of these questions. They're just good coach yourself questions so that we're sort of interpreting and understanding what each of these ideas means for you. So let's see what we've got. Some people saying, yeah. Alex saying, yeah, unfortunately, a bit more time worrying about my weaknesses. Quite a few people saying both. Yeah, lots of both, lots of worrying about our weaknesses. And let me know again in chat, why do you think we don't spend more time making our strengths stronger? What gets in the way of that for you? Is it about your own awareness of what those strengths might be? Is it based on feedback from other people? Is it you feel like you have to spend more time worrying about your weaknesses because that's what's going to help you to progress? Why is it that we don't spend more of our time over here, do we think? Let me know a few insights from your experiences so far. Yeah, Ivan, sometimes it can be the people we are, the systems we are surrounded by. Feels like you have to spend more time worrying about your weaknesses than celebrating successes. Culturally, you do find this question gets different answers sometimes depending on the countries that we are talking to and the cultures that we are talking to. Sometimes about time, yeah, really practical one. A bit insecure about weaknesses, yeah. Comparing, yeah. We know we should never compare, but it's very hard to never compare yourself to other people. More likely to trip us up, yeah, really honest. Company development plans, interesting. Target weaknesses, Alex, that's interesting. That is happening less and less in our experience, but obviously does still happen. Yeah, still trying to figure things out. Yeah, imposter syndrome. Okay, so I think there are a few barriers here that are worth being aware of. The first one is a barrier that we all have in our own brains, which is that we all have a negativity bias. And what that negativity bias in our brains does is it means that we naturally spend more time processing, remembering, recalling the mistakes that we make, the things that we are not as good at. That is, our brains are hardwired to work in that way. And so what we have to do is quite actively think about how we're going to address the balance, how we're going to kind of address that bias and create more balance in our brains. So we have to sort of choose to recognize that this ends up happening quite naturally, whereas this ends up happening more consciously. So worth knowing that, I think, about your brain, just sort of understanding yourself. And then sometimes thinking a bit about when we think about the words that we use, I find it really helpful to think, what are the 2 or 3 things that I want to be great at? And what are the things where it is okay to be good enough? So I would have definitely, for a long time, certainly at the start of my career, I would have always said both. I'm trying to make my strengths stronger and I'm trying to worry about my weaknesses. The challenge with doing that in a sort of way where you've not been really specific about it is you can end up sort of stuck in the middle. You sort of don't really stand out for anything and you're okay and you're good. But there's a challenge about whether you could ever really be great. Can you really build your reputation if you're spreading yourself so thinly? And we know that when we work on our weaknesses, that takes much more energy and effort than when we stretch our strengths. Whereas if we are a bit more specific about thinking, well, there are 2 or 3 things that I do need to get good enough at so that I can do my job today really well, and so that it's not going to hold me back in terms of where I would like to go, the direction I'd like to explore in my career. So what does that look like very specifically? What does good enough look like? Am I really clear about where I am and where I need to get to? To give you a really specific example, which for this group, well, you'll all be brilliant at this, so it won't be a good example, but it is my example, is I used to just think, I'm not very good at numbers. And I was surrounded by people who are very good at numbers, working in banking, working for Barclays, and working in retail, where people are also very good at numbers. And saying you're not very good at numbers is not very helpful, because how are you going to get good enough at numbers? What does that mean? What does that look like? Whereas when I started to think, okay, And that meant, for example, that I wouldn't apply for jobs that had the words commercial acumen, even in a job spec, because I think, oh, well, I'm not very good at mental arithmetic. Does that mean that I can't apply for a job with commercial acumen? Of course it doesn't. But I think because I sort of made these sweeping statements, ended up holding me back. Whereas when I started to be really clear about, okay, I need to be good at managing a budget, I need to be able to read a P&L, and I need to be confident enough to ask questions about that P&L. And once I started to get really specific, I could figure out what that good enough meant. And I could then be really focused about that. And then I could spend time also making my strengths stronger on the 2 or 3 things that I wanted to be great at. And it's not a hard and fast rule, but sort of 80% of time making your strengths stronger, 20% of your time getting good enough at those couple of areas is not a bad rule of thumb. And sometimes if we are doing workshops with organisations and working with organisations over a while, we will often ask people to reflect on this every month. So this month, how much of your time did you spend making your strengths stronger? And what percentage of your time did you spend getting good enough at those areas that you know you just want to improve on? Worth just thinking about. One idea for action for you on strengths. And this really was inspired by my time over at Harvard, where I was lucky enough to be taught by John Cotter. And he introduced me to this idea, and I've sort of developed it specifically for strengths. He talks about, as a leader, one of the most powerful things that you can do is be really clear on both your intent and your impact. And it's always really stayed with me. So what do you intend to be known for? What do you want to build your reputation for? And that's probably going to be 2 or 3 things. The only way to know whether your impact matches your intent is by asking for feedback, for making sure you've got a feedback loop where you understand the impact that you are having on other people. So, for example, I might say, okay, well, my intent is I want to be known for maybe developing ideas, starting stuff from scratch. And maybe I say something about a kind of, let's say, a career expert. Let's just use those 2 as an example. My impact is only known when I start to ask people. And a really simple way to do this in terms of getting strengths-based feedback, which is something we should all be doing as much as we possibly can, is to ask a really simple feedback question. What 3 words would you use to describe me at my best? So start asking for at my best feedback. What 3 words would you use to describe me at my best? And to make this work really well, if you want to build on that intent versus impact idea, write down beforehand, what do you want those 3 words to be? Then ask the question and have a look for how consistent are what you were hoping people were going to say, and then the words that you receive. Few words of caution for when you do this exercise. 1, just be careful about your inner critic kicking in when people give you words. So sometimes people can say a word like thoughtful or empathetic, and you dismiss it straight away because you think everybody's thoughtful, everybody's empathetic. So you do that comparison thing that we talked about, and that critic kicks in and you think, oh, but there are people better than me at that, or that doesn't make me special, or that's not useful. So just quieten that inner critic if it does kick in when people are giving you those words. And then just notice, are there anything that you are surprised by? Have you got new insights? Have you got new levels of awareness based on what people are telling you? And how do you feel about that? Because you choose what you want to be known for. So if your impact is one thing and your intent is another, you might want to think a bit about, well, if that's what I'm being known for, probably that's what people are going to spot opportunities for me to do more of. And how does that feel for me? When my co-founder Helen was at Microsoft, she started organising, she was sort of organising really big events for about 10,000 people all around the world. The Microsoft CEO, very, very senior stakeholders. And so one of the things that she started to find is that she was building a reputation for sort of being this incredible multitasking event organizer who could bring together these very complicated events, a really good troubleshooter. She could make all these things happen. Now, the challenge with that is not what she wanted to be known for. But because she was good at it, just because you are good at something doesn't necessarily mean you want to be known for that thing. You will be good at a longer list of things, I am sure, than the couple of things you want to be known for, or the things that you really enjoy or give you energy. If you really want to think about your own self-awareness around strengths, because this exercise helps get other people to do a bit of the hard work for you, try doing an energy audit. At the end of every day or the end of every week, think about what has given me the most energy this week and why, and what has drained my energy and what was happening. Try and just notice the kind of the moments of energy in your day and those moments where you feel more depleted. So that's a little bit about strengths to get you started. Let's move on to values. Lots of you saying you thought values would be interesting for you. As I've talked about, I think see values as a career compass, something to help you make choices. You've got options. Sometimes choices are in your control, sometimes they're out of your control. But this is about really taking ownership for those choices and figuring out which one feels like the right one for you. I also think values help you with challenges. So when things are feeling hard, it helps you to understand why. Why does this feel difficult for me? And it helps you to move more quickly from the this feels hard to what can I do about it? Helps you to move to action quicker. Your core values stay pretty constant. So in a squiggly career and in a squiggly world where things are changing all the time, your values are an anchor that you can keep coming back to. I find that reassuring. They're a good lens to look at consistently, to think, well, do my values show up in the work that I'm doing? Are my values missing? How much am I getting to live my values through the work that I do? And the thing that doesn't get talked about as much with values is I think when you understand each other's values, you're in a much better position to be able to collaborate effectively. If you understand who someone is, fundamentally, like the things that really motivate and drive somebody, your ability to have empathy, to build a relationship with that person, it's probably the best shortcut I've ever found to leading teams effectively. So every time I've led a big team, led a company, I have always done some sort of values exercises and tools and programs with the teams that I was leading, because I found it was the single best way to understand people before you get into the work that we all need to do and why are we here at work. And if you're thinking, if values feels fluffy, if you're thinking, oh, maybe do values feel a bit fluffy, which I understand, interesting to know that people like a brilliant example of organisation using values is an American football team. So there's an American football team who got brilliant players, but they were losing every week. And what their coach did is he realised they weren't playing for each other. They were sort of playing for themselves. And so he actually did some values exercises with them. There's something called the 4H model, which I'll make sure is in your playlist, where they all got to talk for 5 minutes about their history, hopes, heartbreaks, and there's one other. And they all just had to talk a bit about those. And actually, by doing that, it transformed the relationship that they had with each other. It's a really interesting case study on values in perhaps an unexpected environment that you might not expect to see values showing up. So values is not something you can tick off your to-do list. It does take quite a lot of reflection, but I think you can get some clues quite quickly as to what your values might be using this exercise. So you're all going to partner with me for this exercise, and then hopefully you'll be able to go away and do this yourself after today. So I'm going to talk to you about a high in my career and a low. Everyone's always more interested in the low, so I'll do the low second. And what I'd like you to all just do is be really listening and thinking, what do you think my values might be? So what do you think Sarah's values are? What do you think are the things that motivate and drive me just from hearing these two very short stories? So let's see how we get on. So the high in my career, so I was working for Barclays in Canary Wharf, and I'd worked for Barclays for a while, so I wasn't new to the organisation, but I suddenly found myself in a role where I think for the first time in my career, I found my flow. And so what was different about that job? Well, the first thing was I was creating that role from scratch. No one had done it before me. I was writing my own job specification. I was figuring out what to do in that role. And I loved the ambiguity, the space and the freedom to be able to do that. And I think for the first time in my career, I was asked what I thought, what ideas I'd got. my marketing director, I was working in marketing at the time, used to meet with me every week in Soho over a coffee, first thing on a Tuesday morning. And she'd always just sort of say to me, what's on your mind at the moment, Sarah? What ideas have you got for me this week? And it was sort of like a Pandora's box. I think she sort of released and gave me the permission to have loads of ideas, to think really creatively. It was sort of a catalyst for me to really see how I could add value to an organisation in a way that I never perhaps felt I had before that moment. And I was working with loads of different companies. So I was creating content at the time for this new thing called YouTube, which makes me sound old. And I was working with different creative agencies, loads of different people. I felt like I was learning so much every day from lots of different people with really interesting experiences. And so I was so sort of, immersed and present in that role. And I was so proud of the work that I was doing. It was by no means the biggest scale work in terms of the budgets that we had, but I felt very connected to that work. It felt really creative. It felt like I had a lot of autonomy over it. And every day was sort of slightly different. And even down to really what sounds now like really boring things, but I love the fact that I could, in between visiting different companies and doing the work that I was doing, I had a laptop and I could work in a coffee shop with a laptop. And that at that time felt really freeing to not be sort of sat at a desk or be too structured. I liked that space and that variety. And I loved that role. I got a lot of value from that role. And actually, I'm still very good friends with my marketing director from that time, who's now on the board at Nationwide, Sarah. So I'll always be very grateful for Sarah, because I think she spotted strengths in me before I could see them for myself. Back to the at my best feedback, I think she could see in me that I'd got some sort of potential that she could release if she could find the right place for me and the right kind of role. And she was absolutely right. I loved that job and I did a very good job of that job. That's always boring. No one likes a success story. Let's talk about a low. So a low in my career, I love sport, and I'd gone to work for Lucozade, and I loved the brand, and I was so excited to get the job. It'd been quite a hard assessment centres. I'm sure lots of you have been through assessment centres. And I turned up to this assessment centre. You had to talk about a brand that you were passionate about. And I turned up with mood boards, and I was so enthusiastic. I suspect they felt like they couldn't not give me the job. I was probably going to turn up anyway. So I loved getting the job, and I loved the first 8 weeks, which was all about learning about Lucozade, learning about how they made the product, like the science behind the Lucozade, learning about the sports stars they worked with, the new product development. I was very, very happy for about 10 weeks. Then I started to do the job, and the job was really a sales job, selling vending machines and little fridges full of Lucozade. And that was to offices, to industrial estates, and to leisure centres. It was a proper hardcore sales job. I had sort of missed some of that along the way. Now, I'm an introvert who gets nervous meeting new people. And all I did in that job was build really good relationships and sold nothing. And I honestly remember my manager at that time sort of being confused, because he got really positive feedback from clients who were like, well, we love Sarah, she's always so helpful, she always sorts out problems. But I didn't sell anything, because I would just think, but they've already got a vending machine with some Lucozade in. They don't need any more Lucozade. And so I couldn't get my head around why they would need more Lucozade, because they didn't really need more Lucozade, I didn't think. And I wasn't very good at that transactional nature that sales needed. So I just drove around in my Astra with a boot full of Lucozade, not really selling any of it. And actually at the time felt very isolated, didn't really feel like I could ask for help. And I think I was actually also really embarrassed, because I think I'd built up this role in my mind and felt like it should be the dream job. And it had turned out to be the exact opposite. So that felt like a really hard moment for me in my career, and one where I think it really knocked my confidence. And so it took me a bit to recover from that role and to sort of and to find my way. But it was all fine, so it's all good. But let me know now, from hearing those two stories, if you had to let me know some words that you think might be my values, and there's no right or wrong, and I don't expect you to get it exactly right, but what do you think motivates and drives me? Let me know in chat, just while I get rid of this, ready for the next exercise. What are the words that you think might spring to mind, Claire? Variety, creativity, relationships, autonomy. Yeah. Sometimes people put words that are really nice, like who there? Alexandra just put who put integrity, and I always think, oh, that's not one of my values, but I'd quite like it. So it always makes me feel good doing this exercise. Learning, flexibility, creativity. Okay. So hopefully from that exercise, you can see that quite quickly you get some clues as to who I am and what matters to me. You probably feel like you'd have a decent idea now of, if you were to work with me on a project tomorrow, of some things that matter to me. So my 4 values are achievement, ideas, learning, and variety. And I think at least 2 or 3 of those came out from the words that you've just described. I'm sure I saw learning. I use the word ideas rather than creativity, but we probably all mean about the same thing. And I definitely saw variety. You maybe saw a bit less of achievement. I don't think we saw that one as much. But in the space of 3 or 4 minutes, 3 out of 4 is not bad. That's a really good exercise if you can do that with someone else, because it gives you the space to just talk, to share your stories, and someone else does the listening for you. So if you can do that in pairs, definitely try that. Or if you want to do a sort of more individual activity, it's also helpful to do a full career graph. So I appreciate you might be relatively early into your career, but break down by 3 months, by 6 months, the kind of when have you felt sort of neutral, when have you had your highs, and when have you had your lows. So my career graph looks something like this, and then like that, and then like this, like that, another really big there. So if I was doing my career graph, it would look a bit like that, my whole career, and think, what can you learn from the lows? And what do your highs have in common? What can you learn from the lows, and what do your highs have in common? What we tend to see is in those high moments, you are using your strengths and living your values. And in the lows, you are having to worry too much about your weaknesses, and your values are missing or being contradicted, kind of in conflict in some way. Loads more you can do on values if this is the area you're most interested in, but this is a really, really good place to start. Don't see values as something where you're looking for like an answer. See it as something to continually explore. I only added variety as one of my values 4 or 5 years ago, whereas the first sort of 2 or 3 values I probably understood for the first time about 10 years ago. So you do change and you shift and you understand more about yourself as time goes on, but you probably can quite quickly get to some insights that will be really helpful for you. So let's talk a little bit more about confidence now. And what day are we on? Wednesday, middle of the day Wednesday. Let me know in chat one very small success you've had this week, personal or professional. One very small success you've had this week. It can be a personal example or a professional example. Really good exercise to do. Always makes everybody feel good doing this exercise. Takes a moment to think about it usually. So something that's happened this week that you would describe as a very small success. Oh, amazing. Guest lecture in March. Perfect example. Any others? What other very small successes have we all had this week? Oh, lovely. What's blocking you for your job hunt? Don't beat yourself up. Lovely. So kind of a bit of a mindset shift. Really nice example. Got your marks in on time for 3 separate modules. Brilliant, Claire. What else? They can be things like managing to do exercise or picking up that book you've been meaning to pick up for ages. Yeah, wellness, brilliant. An awesome meal, great example, Sophia. Really, really good. Like we said, these are very small successes. They don't need to be really big. Went for a swim for the first time in years. Perfect, Ivan. Positive feedback from your project manager, Charlotte. Great. Lovely conversations. How nice. Really good one. Okay. The reason I ask you to do that is often we don't spot, share or celebrate our very small successes. We move past them really quickly. And if you are struggling with your self-belief or your confidence, this exercise can really help to boost your belief. Remember the 3 R's when you're doing this for this to work really well, because you're essentially trying to create an optimistic environment for yourself and for your brain. And that is the first thing we want to do is recognize our very small successes. So hopefully just talking about it, you're starting to think, oh, maybe I've had more than one. Maybe I've had one every day. If you can, write them down somewhere. When we record our very small successes, so for everybody who put them in chat, you have to process them that bit more. You had to work out what to write in that sentence. You had to take it from a thought into a sentence. So we know from positive psychologist Martin Seligman, this works better if you write them down. Write them down in the notes section of your phone, write them down in a notebook. You don't need to share them with anyone if you don't want to, but writing them down is probably the most important of the 3 R's, because it helps to improve the quality of your reflections. And if you put them all in the same place, you start to notice trends and themes. And Martin Seligman says, when we take the time to notice the things that go right, we give ourselves lots of little rewards throughout the day. So it's just about noticing and spotting those small successes. 2 ways you can do this exercise. If you want to do this individually, I do this individually every time I'm having a tough week, tough month, things feel really hard. And I just sort of think at the end of every day, I'm just going to write down one thing for myself. I tend to do it for 7 or 8 days and then I stop. I love variety, so I never do anything consistently. So that's when I'm doing it for myself. The one thing we do consistently as a team at Amazing If is every Friday, we do Win of the Week. So every Friday we go onto our Teams channel and we all share our own Win of the Weeks. Now that has the advantage of not only recognizing and recording, but we also share and celebrate each other's successes. So you sort of get an extra boost. And it also gives you an insight into what's been happening in other people's weeks that you might not be aware of. So you might not know that someone's Win of the Week is the fact that they could pick up their kid 3 times from school this week, and that's been really important to them. Or they made time to do something for themselves that you didn't know about and they've not had time to talk to you about. So you can do this collectively. It's really valuable to build up collective confidence, or you can do this individually if you're feeling like, I just need to sort of create, maybe you're feeling a bit more pessimistic than optimistic, and you sort of just need to recover that and reboot that energy for yourself. I always love these exercises, always find them really helpful. Let's talk a little bit about networking then, and start with a bit of a word association game. When we say networking, what words spring to mind for you? Let me know in chat. Positive, neutral, negative. When we say networking, are we fans? Are we not fans? Horror, Claire. That's such an evocative word, isn't it? Horror. Difficult. Yeah. Fans. But think it's termed wrongly. Ivan, yeah. Interesting. Maybe you'd go for building brilliant relationships, career community, or let me know if you've got a different word that I can borrow some brilliance from you that's better. Anxiety, small talk, good one-to-one, win-win, brilliant, PJ, yeah. It can sound quite superficial, just being human, yeah, nice. Just like human connection, maybe connection's quite a good word. We sometimes talk about career connections, opportunistic. Yeah, okay. So I think when we're thinking about networking, back to that point that we started with when we talked about the definition, we really want to think about this principle of people helping people. What have you got to give? Start with this giving mindset. 3 Ds to think about. Donate, what can you give? Diversity, have you got a range of people supporting you in your careers? Make sure you're not stuck in an echo chamber trap. And distance, are you cultivating strong as well as weak ties? Some of you might have read a bit about strong and weak ties. Strong ties are your supporters, your advocates, your sponsors, your cheerleaders, your champions. Those people know you really well, because to be able to do those things, they need to know you well. They usually need to have worked with you and seen your work. Weak ties tend to be people who know things that you don't know and know people that you don't know, particularly important for career change. And if it's useful, I'll give you lots of resources on things like strong and weak ties. But I just wanted to talk about this 4C model for networking, which is thinking really consciously about the role that you want to play in a network, in a relationship, in a career community. Use whatever words work for you. And I think when I started to think about this for myself as an introvert, it really, really helped me. So firstly, within a network, and a network can be two people, you can be a consumer. And by that, what we mean is you are taking some information or some insights and figuring out how to make it useful for other people. So maybe you've come to something today, and then you go back to your team or to a friend or to a colleague or someone you've worked with in the past, and you share one of the things you heard today because you think it might be helpful for them. Brilliant. You're giving, you're donating some of your knowledge and your ideas and your insights. And then we can think about which networks, which communities do we want to be part of where we're really actively contributing? What have you got to give, and who would benefit from what it is you have to give? I talked about having a giving mindset. That doesn't mean giving unreservedly and without boundaries. It means being clear about how can you add value and who would benefit from that value. When I figured out I really enjoyed and was really passionate about developing people, I figured out that's what I'd got to give. And when I built my connections and my communities based on that area of passion, and then as I developed it, a bit more expertise, and then over time, even more expertise, that was the real turning point, the transformation for me and my network. I felt much more comfortable starting with what I'd got to give. And once I'd figured out something useful and then who would benefit from that, that became a real unlocker for me of creating a really good career community. So figuring out what is the 1-2 things you've got to give, and how and who are you going to give that to? Can you be a really good connector? This is just about connecting people together in your organization, out of your organization, spotting those opportunities to do that, and then you kind of lead people to it. Now, this can feel a bit harder, I think, earlier in your career, though maybe not. You might have a really good network already. But I think also look out for connectors. There are people who are brilliant natural connectors and who get a lot of joy from connecting people. We all like helping people. We feel good when we help people. So if you spot a connector, never apologize or feel worried about asking them for help. Those people love connecting you. Do you know anyone who? I'm really interested in X. Anyone you'd suggest that I could go and talk to? Those people are really good at making those connections and will go out of their way to get you started. As an introvert as well, I always love a connection when someone makes a connection on my behalf, because it's way easier when someone's made an initial connection, I find, than doing something cold. So spot those connectors and ask those connectors for help. And then the last one, if a network doesn't exist that you want to be part of, create one. Start one from scratch and let go of the idea of what a network has to look like. One of the most effective networks I'm part of exists virtually on a WhatsApp group, which is a business authors group. And it's a really helpful group. It's really supportive, lots of people helping people. Most of us have never met in person. And we're all sort of united by a single purpose, which is around, we're all sort of writing business books, but from loads of different points of view for lots of different reasons. And everyone just puts questions. Everyone's very supportive. We all support each other's publications when they come out. And it's a brilliant network that one individual just created because he sort of wanted to be part of a business author network, maybe from people who didn't only write books, who sort of ran businesses as well. And so he just started really small. There's now probably about 30 people in it. So create networks if you want to. I actually really enjoy creating networks, and they're a good opportunity to experiment with using your strengths in different ways. Good reason to connect with new people. So in squiggly careers, always worth remembering, the relationships that you build belong to you. So don't ignore or avoid it, because they're so valuable. People will spot opportunities and possibilities for you. They will help you to learn, but figure out how you can do this in a way that works for you, in a way where this can feel positive and something to look forward to. And as someone who felt the exact opposite about networking, as someone who could find a reason never to do it, I promise there is a way to find that for everybody. Perhaps have a listen to our podcast on networking for everyone if you really want to explore this in more detail. Let's finish by talking a bit about possibilities. Often when we are exploring possibilities, we can just see the obvious moves we can make, the moves that people expect you to make, the moves that people before you have made, moves you might expect yourself to make. And there is nothing wrong with those obvious possibilities, but we are limiting ourselves if they're the only ones that we consider. And the obvious possibility might not be the most motivating one. It might just be the obvious one. So what are those? We don't want to ignore them. But let's also make sure that we're thinking about the ambitious possibilities. What are the things that you'd love to do, but perhaps feel slightly reticent to say out loud? What are those things that where there's maybe a yet? Well, I'd love to lead that team, but I don't have any line management experience yet. Or I'd love to make a sideways move into that team, but I haven't got any experience in that area yet. I moved from marketing to being head of corporate responsibility for Sainsbury's, and I did that move having never worked in corporate responsibility before. So I felt like a really ambitious move for me to make. So what does ambitious feel like for you? It's perhaps slightly early in your career to think about this, but you never know. What are the pivot possibilities for you? So you can pivot back to something you've done before, and you can pivot forward into a new area. Now, when we say back, no one likes the idea of back in careers, but what we mean is you might want to rediscover something you've done before. I could pivot back to working corporate responsibility, which I really enjoyed. I could pivot back into working in large organizations, which I also really enjoyed. So I could rediscover some of those things that I've done before and take the experience I've now got and apply them in those ways. Or I could take my skills and my strengths and apply them in a new context. So now I run a company about career development. I could go and work in a school on career development. I could go and work in public sector on career development, something I've never done before. I could pivot sort of forward, taking those skills and strengths I've got and put them into a new place, or I could go and work in a charity, for example. I did a pretty big pivot when I moved out of working for people to working for myself, as somebody who never thought they'd end up working for themselves. And then also think about, what are the dream possibilities? Worth thinking, with all of the kind of constraints out of the way, what would you be doing? And you still have to work. So you can't sort of go, nothing. Like I always think, oh, I just read all day. But that's sort of not an option unless you can come up with a job where you can just read all day. Even our editor, who I think that must be her job, she doesn't get to read all day. So think about, what would that be? Because again, there's lots of different ways of exploring our possibilities, and we don't want to kind of let go of some of those dreams that we might have. So this is really a mind mapping exercise. This is a framework to help you to think about possibilities. And then the next things to just think about once you've got this, firstly, prioritize. Which are the two that you want to actively explore in the next 6 months? And I'd keep it to that kind of time frame. And then ask yourself, what do I need to know? And who can help me? And use this as a prompt for curious career conversations. Back to this point about we want to be exploring our possibilities. You're not applying for these roles. Go away and talk to people about, get a window into their world. What skills might you need? What gaps have you got? Really start to kind of get below the surface of the reality of these roles. I remember thinking I should go and work in TV advertising. That was a really obvious possibility for me. And the more I learned about it, the less I realised I sort of was actually motivated by doing that role. It needed loads of skills that I'd not got. I didn't think I would enjoy it. It was very structured. The things that I thought that job was not really what that job was. And so by looking before you leap, sometimes it means that you do this. You think, actually, that's not for me. And that's a really good use of your time. And what's interesting is by doing this, you never quite know what might happen as a result. So when I did this and thought I'm going to go and work in TV advertising, did lots of exploring, curious career conversations, spent a day with some of the team, really got to grips with those roles. I think we all realised that I wasn't going to be right for that role. But interestingly, I still went to work in that team. And the role that I went to do was that high that I described to you earlier in the workshop. So that role would never have happened if I hadn't gone away and explored the possibility. And then Sarah had said to me, okay, let's not do the TV advertising thing, but how about coming to do this sort of slightly weird and wonderful role, and we don't quite know what it is, but we think you could probably have a go at it. And I remember thinking, that sounds much better suited to me. So I will always be really glad that I went off and explored that possibility. So I will hand over to you for questions in a second, but just some coach yourself questions just to summarise. So think about, when are you at your best? What can you learn from a low? Who is supporting you to build your belief? How can you help other people? And who could you have a curious career conversation with? You're very welcome to have those questions if that would be useful, because I appreciate you probably not had a chance to write them down. And here's just a quick visual summary for you of the ideas for action that we've talked through. When are you at your best? Let's start asking for loads of strengths-based feedback. Have a go at the high-low exercise and the career graph to really think about your values. Build your belief daily with very small successes. Think about the role you want to play in a network and start actively exploring your possibilities. I'd be really interested to know from all of you, where are you going to start? What's the one action that today has prompted for you? So I know we're going to have some breakouts and you'll get to talk about this a little bit further, but it's always nice for me to see in chat sort of what has today sparked for you. Maybe one of the specific ideas for action feels really useful. Maybe there's something you've got in the back of your mind that's now come to the front of your mind. But we know that learning lasts much longer if we do something with it, particularly if we do something with it in the next 7 days. So let me know something short, realistic, specific that you're going to do in the next week or so as a result of having spent the last hour thinking a bit about the skills to succeed in a squiggly career. But Claire's going to go through the exercises to think and act on possibilities for change. Lovely. I will actually just stop sharing my screen because you probably don't need to see that anymore. Lovely, Sophia. Proactively think about what you want to be known for and what you want to strengthen. Yeah, brilliant. That intent versus impact. How can you make your strengths stronger? How can you stretch your strengths? We're often not conscious enough about where we are with our strengths today and how do we keep growing them. Our squiggly careers don't stay still and we don't want our strengths to stay still either. Other ideas for action from anybody? Let me know in chat. Oh, lovely, Ivan, getting your team to do more wins. Really nice, really good insight into people's personal lives. Just helps you to feel like you get to know people at a personal level. Intent versus impact. 3 words, yeah, and do the compare and contrast. So glad, thank you. I'm glad the presentation worked well. Career conversation, amazing. I set myself the goal to have 1 curious career conversation every month because I'm someone who, if I didn't do that, I would just spend time with the same people. And so it helps me to sort of get out of my comfort zone and to create new connections and to learn from new people. High-low mapping from Liz, perfect. Ask for feedback, amazing. Be more reflective, Reese, lovely. Even if you do, it's amazing. If you did 5 minutes of reflection a day, you make way more progress than you'd imagine, because most of us actually don't have 5 minutes to reflect at the moment in a day because everybody's so busy and we've got so much on. So try maybe setting yourself a target of 5 minutes, even put a timer on your phone. I call it press pause. I literally put in my diary 5 minutes press pause and just sit and either just think about something or do a mind map or ask myself a coach yourself question. And if people have got any questions now, feel free to put them in chat. And it doesn't have to be directly related to anything we have talked about. If it's just about careers or career development, very happy to answer any questions anyone might have before we do breakout rooms. Why did I decide to leave my corporate role, Claire? Great question. So I loved working in big corporate organizations. Amazing if our company started not even as a side project, as just an idea. And so we had started doing some workshops. We started our podcast. We'd written our first book, all while we were both still in corporate roles. Helen was at Microsoft. I was at Sainsbury's. And we started to get demand from organizations to deliver our career development, exactly as you've seen today. The way that we used to do that was we used to take holiday from our corporate jobs to go and run career development workshops for organizations. And that was only sustainable to a point. We both now have quite young kids, and it started to be financially viable that it was a real option, but we did it in a really pragmatic way. Helen left her role at Microsoft first. We kept testing. Most businesses fail because the ideas haven't been tested fully enough to see whether the supply and the demand works. I think by the time we both went into Amazing If full time, we were really confident about the supply and demand. We had not anticipated the pandemic, I think it is fair to say, but it wasn't a running away from corporate life. I think we just got to the point where we both thought, if we don't give this a go in terms of seeing whether this is a business in its own right, we will both regret it. But neither of us see ourselves as entrepreneurs particularly. I think we just see ourselves as, we had an idea about careers and seeing careers in a different way. And we get a lot of personal satisfaction from helping people with their careers. So that was why, really, I think we felt confident enough that the demand was going to be there. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm just sarah@amazingif.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Top tips on moving from employed to self-employed life. Do you know what my number one tip would be? I really missed my peers. So even though I've got a co-founder, and even though we have some people in our Amazing If team, I missed the peer group of being as part of a big organization and the teams that you lead. I think you have more people around you day to day. And so one of the things that I've had to be really conscious about is, how can I still have those connections, learn from different people, spend time with different people when you're in a kind of smaller environment. So I have been much more conscious about doing that. And obviously COVID hasn't helped in the last couple of years. But now I'm being very intentional about spending time with different people, with different backgrounds, with different points of view to offer me. So yeah, I missed some of my peers, and I've still really stayed in touch with them and used them actually quite consciously sometimes if I'm a bit stuck or need a bit of help. People who are asking, which everybody always asks, the app is called Paper, that I use to draw, owned by a company called WeTransfer. You can get it for free, and I think we pay £1.89 to get a bit of extra functionality that you can see, a few more of the little tools, but yeah, it's called Paper. No worries.
Sarah, thank you so much.
No problem.
That was absolutely fantastic. There's so many things to take away from that. It was brilliant, absolutely packed. I don't know how you managed to get so much across to us in such a short amount of time. That was superb, Sarah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, everybody else, this is the point at which Sarah's kindly offered us the opportunity to ask questions, which we've just done in the chat. So what we're going to do now is split off into some rooms, some chat rooms, and hopefully you're going to land, if you were on the MBA, or if you were on FAFM, or if you were on international management, you're going to land in a room with Jane or Jackie or I. And then if you were one of our graduates that was from another program that wasn't one of those three that's listed, you'll be in another room, a chat room. And we're going to be able to facilitate some conversation around this. And then we will come back again. Once we've done that, we'll do that for about 10 minutes. And then we'll come back again for a final goodbye and thank you to Sarah after the chat rooms. And then we will have Josh, our wonderful Josh from Alumni, who wants to tell you all about the other things you can get access to with Alumni. So thank you very much for sticking with us. Thank you for breaking out and having a nice interaction in your group rooms. And I'd like to bring you all back in now, just for the final few minutes. Has anybody got any other questions or anything they'd like to share with Sarah that maybe popped out of their groups? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So I'm just going to give a little bit of feedback from the group that we were in. We had a lovely mixed bunch of people in our group, mainly people who had done the international management or the management program over the last 4 or 5 years, some of whom have stayed with their companies for 4 or 5 years and are progressing up, and noticed that the ladder that Sarah talked about makes sense to them in that context, but found today's work really useful, particularly around the idea of values, and will take some of that away in order to do with their team that they're bringing on now that they're in a management position. So that was lovely. They're not looking for that person isn't looking for new opportunities, but was really, really connecting with what you were talking about in terms of bringing the best out of the people that they've got working with them now. So Sarah, that was great. And then we also had a point made about the fact that you're talking, noting down your wins every week was really a lovely idea and something that people should practice more often, particularly because the pace of life now is so fast and we tend to forget everything we've accomplished. And that person was talking about how they've been trying to write their CV and upgrading their CV recently, and journaling, etc. And writing those things down, Sarah, was really helpful. So those were the two key things that came out of ours.
Right. Yeah, and I think that whole whenever you come to write the CV, you always think, oh, I wish I'd done this along the way rather than waiting and you're 2 years into a job. So I would say, obviously, it's unrealistic to spend loads of time on your CV all of the time, but once a quarter, half an hour on your CV and your LinkedIn profile, given 90% of people recruiting for any role look at your LinkedIn profile. Half an hour on your CV and on your LinkedIn profile once a quarter is time very well spent. And you'll be so thankful of yourself when you do get to the point where you're thinking, oh, I'm just exploring this new possibility or thinking about this role. And make sure those LinkedIn profiles are good LinkedIn profiles.
Thank you. That's a really, really good tip, Sarah. Thank you so much. That is incredibly helpful. And a good jog for some of us slightly more mature individuals as well that might be on this chat. Thank you. Okay, that's brilliant. Sarah, I'd really like to say thank you so much for today. You were phenomenal. Your energy was unbelievable. I was reminded of my complete lack of technology by my former students who said, Claire, we'll have to get you the app. It was superb. Thank you so much. You were brilliant, Sarah. Thank you very, very much. So big round of applause to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. Thing we're really motivated by is sharing our work, and hopefully you all now sharing it. So as I said, please take these ideas, use them elsewhere, email me if you've got questions. We don't sort of keep any of our intellectual property to ourselves. So the thing that I love hearing the most is when you have taken this and shared it with your teams or your organisations. So anything we can do to help you do that successfully, always let me know. And I hope it's just proved some useful food for thought for your own careers, but also supporting other people's careers as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I'd like to hand over to Josh now. If Josh is around. Josh.
I am, yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. Josh, I'm going to hand over to you. Is that okay?
That's great. Thank you, Claire. I'll just share my screen. Hi, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Josh Papanikoulis. I'm the alumni manager for the business school. And since you've all made the effort to be on lunchtime today to join us, I want to share a bit more about the alumni benefits that are accessible to you and some other stuff you might be interested into. Let's try and share my screen. Okay. Okay, is that visible to everyone? Give me a thumbs up. Brilliant.
Yes.
So, what is the alumni community? We are a massive network of Exeter alumni now in over 183 different countries worldwide. There's about 30,000 business school alumni, and really what we're trying to do through the alumni community and what's available to you is professional networking opportunities, career support forever, and the chance to continue your learning with us through a range of digital media, continued access to academic materials through online library access and journal access as well. So I'm going to talk you through a few examples of all of that now. So we hold regular in-person events. Obviously, we're coming back to them now since COVID restrictions have started to reduce. And an example of some of the recent speakers we had pre-pandemic, we had Dame Ellen MacArthur come and launch our Centre for Circular Economy. We had Deborah Meaden come and launch our Centre for Entrepreneurship. And also we had a suite of online webinars across the pandemic and over the last 2 years. We release regular podcasts, which are usually talks with our academic colleagues where you can find out about some of the latest research going on in the business school related to topical global issues. We had a Welcome to the City event for graduates who've just moved to London, for those of you who are based there. And we also had a COVID-19 thought leadership series where we had the CEO of Ipsos Mori talk through emerging trends in relation to the future of work that were coming out of the last couple of years. We've also got a range of special interest groups. So you don't just have to engage with academia, you can also engage with the societies you are a member of, and also with other alumni who are based in your location, wherever you are in the world. We have alumni country contacts and ambassadors if you are a member of one of the FT ranked programs. So you can connect with anyone and always get in touch with the alumni office. Send us an email if you're looking to contact alumni in your area, because we love building those bridges between alumni. We also have an entrepreneurs network, which was recently set up. So if entrepreneurship is your thing, we have regular meetups and best practice sharing for anyone who is either an entrepreneur themselves or interested in entrepreneurship. And then finally, we offer lifelong career support. If you, I'll post the link in the chat after this presentation, but really this encompasses a number of benefits. We have a mentor scheme, which you can either be a mentee or, if you fancy, a mentor in CV writing support, mock interviews, job vacancies on our Handshake platform. There really is a wide variety of benefits on there, which we encourage you to take a look at. That's all from me. The last thing I will say is, I think if you want more information on the latest news and events like this one in the alumni community, look out for your regular alumni newsletters, and also head over to LinkedIn and join one of our alumni groups, because they're well worth it just to keep you updated on the latest news and events. Thank you.
Great, Josh, thank you so much. So that just leaves it to me now to say thank you very much to everybody for joining us. It was lovely to see so many of you here today. I hope some of you might have seen some of your former colleagues and students with you whilst you were here. And if you would like to get in contact with us, please do so. You've got Josh's details there. And you can always get in touch with any of us if you want to look us up on the university website. We're happy to get in contact. But thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It was a pleasure to share an hour and a half with you. Okay, take care, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.